The Chronicle of Peru by Pedro Cieza de León, a Spanish conquistador and chronicler who lived from 1520 to 1554. Translated to English by Clements R. Markha for the Hakluyt Society of London, England. Narration by AWS Polly. All content is in the public domain. Chapters to 91 to 105. Chapter 91. Of the river of Apurímac, of the valley of Zaquixaguana, of the causeway which passes over it, and of what else there is to relate until the city of Cusco is reached. Further on is the river of Apurímac, which is the largest of those which are crossed between this place and Caxamarca. It is 8 leagues from that of Abancay, and the road is much broken up by mountains and declivities, so that those who made it must have had much labor in breaking up the rocks, and leveling the ground, especially where it descends towards the river. Here the road is so rugged and dangerous, that some horses, laden with gold and silver, have fallen in and been lost without any possibility of saving them. There are 2 enormous stone pillars, to which the bridge is secured. When I returned to the city of the kings, after we had defeated Gonzalo Pizarro, some of our soldiers crossed the river without a bridge, which had been destroyed, each man in a sack fastened to a rope passing from the pillar on one side of the river to that on the other, more than 50 of us. It is no small terror that is caused by seeing what men pass through in these Indies. After crossing this river the place is presently seen where the buildings of the Incas were, and where they had an oracle. The devil, according to the Indians, replied from out of the trunk of a tree, near which they buried gold, and offered up sacrifices. From this river of Apurímac the road leads to the buildings of Limatambo, and crossing the mountains of Vilcacanga, which is the place where the Adelantado Don Diego de Almagro, with some Spaniards, fought a battle with the Indians before he entered Cusco. The valley of Zaquixaguana is reached, which is a plain situated between the chains of mountains. It is not very broad, nor long. At the beginning of it, is the place where Gonzalo Pizarro was defeated, and close by he and his captains were tried by order of the licentiate Don Pedro de la Gasca, President for His Majesty. In this valley there were very rich and sumptuous edifices, where the nobles of Cusco retired to enjoy their ease and pleasure. Here, also, was the place where the governor Don Francisco Pizarro ordered Chalcuchima, the captain general of Atahualpa, to be burnt. The distance from this valley to the city of Cusco is 5 leagues along the Grand Royal Road. The water of a river which rises near this valley forms a large and deep morass, and it would be very difficult to cross it, if the Incas had not caused a broad and strong causeway to be made, with walls on either side so strong as to last for a long time. In former times this valley was very populous, and was covered with crops, in fields which were so numerous that it was a sight worth seeing. These fields were divided from each other by broad walls, with the crops of maize and roots sown between them, and thus they rose up the sides of the mountains. Many of these crops are of wheat, which grows well. There are also large flocks belonging to the Spaniards who are citizens of the ancient city of Cusco, which is built between certain hills in the manner and fashion that I shall declare in the following chapter. Chapter 92. Of the manner in which the city of Cusco is built, of the 4 royal roads which lead from it, of the grand edifices it contained, and who was its founder. The city of Cusco is built in a very rugged situation, and is surrounded by mountains on all sides. It stands on the banks of 2 streams, one of which flows through it, and there are buildings on both sides. To the eastward there is a valley, which commences at the city itself, so that the waters of the streams which pass by the city flow to the east. This valley is very cold, and there are no trees which yield fruit, except a few mole. On the north side of the city, on the highest and nearest mountain, there is a fortress which, for its strength and grandeur, was and still is an excellent edifice, although now most of it is in ruins. The massive foundations, however, with the principal blocks of stone, are still standing. To the north and east of Cusco are the provinces of Antisuyu, which contain the dense forests of the Andes, and also those of Chinchasuyu, extending towards Quito. To the south are the provinces of the Callao and of Kuntisuyu, of which the Callao is between the east and south winds, and Kuntisuyu between the south and west. One part of this city was called Hanan Cusco, and another Huron Cusco, where the most noble and ancient families lived. Another division was the hill of Carmanca, where there were certain small towers for observing the movements of the sun, which the people venerated. In the central and most populous part of the city there was a large open space, which they say was once a lake or swamp, but that the founders filled it up with earth and stones, and made it as it now is. From this square 4 royal roads led. That which they called Chinchasuyu went towards the coast, and also to Quito and Pasto. The second road, called Kuntisuyu, led to the provinces which are subject to this city, and to that of Arequipa. The third royal road, called Antisuyu, goes to the provinces at the skirts of the Andes, and to some villages beyond the mountains. The last road, called Calasuyu, leads to the provinces which extend as far as Chile. Thus, as in Spain, the ancients made a division of the whole country according to provinces, and thus the Indians knew those districts, which extended over so vast a country, by the names of the roads. The stream which flows through the city has its bridges for passing from one side to the other. In no part of this kingdom was there found a nobly adorned city, except at this Cusco, which was, as I have already said many times, the capital of the empire of the Incas, and their royal seat. In all the other parts of the kingdom the people live in houses scattered about, and if there are some villages, they are without plan or order, or anything worthy of praise. But Cusco was grand and stately, and must have been founded by a people of great intelligence. It had fine streets, except that they were narrow, and the houses were built of solid stones, beautifully joined. These stones were very large and well cut. The other parts of the houses were of wood and straw, but there are no remains of tiles, bricks, or lime amongst them. In this city there were many grand buildings of the Incas in various parts, in which he who succeeded to the lordship celebrated his festivals. Here, too, was the solemn and magnificent temple of the sun, called Curie Concha, which was rich in gold and silver. Most parts of the city were inhabited by Mitamis, and laws and statutes were established for their conduct, which were understood by all, as well regarding their superstitions and temples, as in matters relating to government. This city was the richest of which we have any knowledge, in all the Indies, for great store of treasure was often brought in to increase the grandeur of the nobles, and no gold nor silver might be taken out, on pain of death. The sons of the chiefs in all the provinces came to reside at court, with their retinues, for a certain time. There were a great many gilders and workers in silver, who understood how to work the things ordered by the Incas. The chief priest, called Hulak Umu, lived in the grand temple. At present there are very good houses, with upper stories roofed with tiles. The climate, although it is cold, is very healthy, and Cusco is better supplied with provisions than any other place in the kingdom. It is also the largest city, and more Spaniards hold encomiendas over Indians here than elsewhere. The city was founded by Manco Capac, the first king Inca, and, after he had been succeeded by 10 other lords, the Adelantado Don Francisco Pizarro, governor and captain general of these kingdoms, rebuilt and refounded it in the name of the emperor, Don Carlos, our Lord, in the month of October of the year 1534. Chapter 93. In which the things of this city of Cusco are described more in detail. As this city was the most important and principal place in the kingdom, the Indians of the neighborhood were assembled at certain seasons of the year to clean the streets, and perform other duties. Near the city, on one side and the other, there were the same storehouses as are to be found in all parts of the kingdom, some larger, and some stronger than others. As these Incas were so rich and powerful, some of their edifices were gilded, and others were adorned with plates of gold. Their ancestors held, as a sacred place, a great hill near the city called Huánucar, and they say that human blood and many lambs and sheep were sacrificed on it. The city was full of strangers from all parts, Indians of Chile and Pasto, Canaris, Chachapoyas, Huancas, Coyas, and men of all the tribes in the provinces, each living apart in the quarter assigned by the governors of the city. They all retained the costumes of their fathers, and went about after the manner of their native land, and, even when 100,000 men were assembled together, the country of each Indian was easily known by the peculiar headdress which distinguished him. Some of these strangers buried their dead in high mountains, others in their houses, and others in tombs with live women, precious things, and plenty of food. The Incas, as I was given to understand, interfered in none of these things, so long as their vassals adored and venerated the sun, and this adoration they called Mocha. In many parts of the city there are great edifices under the ground, and even now some tiles and pieces of gold are found buried in the bowels of the earth. Assuredly there must be great treasure buried within the circuit of the city, but those who are living know not where to find it. As there was so large a concourse of people here, and as the devil, by the permission of God, had such complete mastery over them, there were many soothsayers, sorcerers, and idolaters. Even now the city is not yet entirely free of them, especially as regards witchcraft. Near the city there are many warm valleys where there are fruit and other trees which grow well, and most of the fruit is brought to the city for sale. They also reap much wheat, of which they make bread, and they have planted many orange trees and other fruit trees both of Spain and of the country. They have mills over the stream which flows through the city, and at a distance of 4 leagues may be seen the quarry from which the stones were conveyed of which the city is built, a sight well worth seeing. They rear fowls in Cusco, and capons as fat and good as those of Granada, and in the valleys there are herds of cattle, and flocks, both of Spanish sheep and of those of the country. Although there are no trees round the city, the pulses of Spain ripen very well. Chapter 94. Which treats of the valley of UK and of the strong fortress at Tambo, and of part of the province of Canisuyu. About 4 leagues from this city of Cusco, a little more or less, there is a valley called UK, which is very beautiful, confined between ranges of mountains in such sort that the shelter thus afforded makes the climate very pleasant and healthy. It is neither too hot nor too cold, and is considered so excellent that the citizens of Cusco have several times proposed to remove the city into the valley. But as the houses in the city are so grand, they could not undertake to build them anew. They have planted many trees in this valley of UK, and there is good hope that in time there will be large vineyards and beautiful and refreshing orchards as well in this valley, as in that of Vilcas, and in others. Indeed, they have already been commenced. I say more of this valley than of the others, because the Incas thought much of it, and went to it for their festivities and solace, especially Hakluyt Kacha Inca, who was the grandfather of Tupac Inca Yupanqui. In all parts of the valley are to be seen fragments of many buildings which have once been very large, especially those at Tambo, 3 leagues down the valley, between 2 great mountains, forming a ravine through which a stream flows. Although the climate of the valley is as pleasant as I have described, these mountains are quite white with snow during the greater part of the year. In this place the Incas had the strongest fort in all their dominions, built on rocks, where a small force might hold their own against a large one. Among these rocks there were certain masses of stone which made the place impregnable, and, lower down, the sides of the mountains are lined with terraces one above the other, on which they raised the crops which sustained them. Among the stones there may still be seen the figures of lions and other wild animals, and of men with arms like halberds, as if they were guarding the way. They are all well and skillfully executed. There were many edifices, and they say that, before the Spaniards conquered this kingdom, they contained great treasure. In these buildings there are stones, well cut and fitted, which are so large that it must have required many men and great ingenuity to raise them, and place them where they now are. It is said for certain that, in these edifices of Tambo, or in others at some other place with the same name, for this is not the only place called Tambo, in a certain part of a royal palace or of a temple of the sun, gold is used instead of mortar, which, jointly with the cement that they make, serve to unite the stones together. The governor Don Francisco Pizarro got much of this gold, before the Indians could take it away. Some Spaniards also say that Hernando Pizarro and Don Diego de Almagro the Younger got much gold from Pacari Tambo. I do not myself hesitate to believe these things, when I remember the rich pieces of gold that were taken to Seville from Caxamarca, where they collected the treasure which Atahualpa promised to the Spaniards, most of it from Cusco. There was little to divide afterwards, found by the Christians, for the Indians carried it off, and it is buried in parts unknown to anyone. If the fine cloths which were destroyed and lost in those times, had been preserved, they would have been worth a great deal. The Indians called Chumbivillicas, Vainas, and Pamatambos, and many other nations which I do not mention, lived in the country called Kuntisuyu. Some of them were warlike, and their villages are in very lofty mountains. They have vast quantities of flocks, both domesticated and wild. All their houses are of stone, thatched with straw. In many places there are buildings for their chiefs. The rites and customs of these Indians were the same as those of other parts, and they sacrificed lambs and other things in their temples. It is notorious that the devil was seen in a temple which they had in a certain part of the district of Kuntisuyu, and I have heard of certain Spaniards, in the present times, who saw apparitions of this our enemy. In the rivers they have collected much gold, and they were getting it out when I was at Cusco. In Pamaytambo and other parts of this kingdom they have very good tapestry, the wool being very fine from which they make it, and the colors with which they dye it are so perfect that they excel those of other countries. There are many rivers in this province of Kuntisuyu, some of which are crossed by bridges of ropes, made in the way I have already described. There are also many fruit and other trees, deer and partridges, and good falcons to fly at them. Chapter 95. Of the forest of the Andes, of their great thickness, of the huge snakes which are bred in them, and of the evil customs of the Indians who live in the interior of these forests. This Cordillera of the Andes must be one of the grandest in the world, for it commences at the Straits of Magallanes, extends along the whole extent of this kingdom of Peru, and traverses so many provinces that they cannot be enumerated. It is covered with high peaks, some of them well covered with snow, and others with mouths of fire. The forests on these mountains are very difficult to penetrate by reason of their thickness, and because during the greater part of the year it rains. The shade is so dark that it is necessary to go with much caution, for the roots of the trees spread out and cover all the ground, and when it is desired to pass with horses, much labor is necessary in making roads. It is said among the Orjones of Cusco, that Tupac Inca Yupanqui traversed these forests with a large army, and many of the tribes who inhabited them were very difficult to conquer and bring under his sway. In the skirts of the mountains towards the South Sea, the natives were intelligent, they were all clothed, and were ruled by the laws and customs of the Incas. But, towards the other sea, in the direction of the sunrise, it is well known that the inhabitants are of less understanding and reason. They raise a great quantity of coca, which is a very precious plant among the Indians, as I will relate in the next chapter. As the forests are very large, the truth may be received that they contain many animals, as well bears, tigers, lions, tapirs, pigs, and striped wild cats, as other wild beasts worthy of note. Some Spaniards have also seen serpents of such bigness that they look like beams, but, although one should sit on them, they would do no harm, nor do they try to kill any person. In talking over this matter of the serpents with the Indians of Cusco, they told me something which I will relate here, as they assured me of its truth. In the time of the Inca Yupanqui, who was grandson of the Inca Huaycacha, certain captains were sent with a large army to visit these forests, by the Inca's order, and to bring the Indians they met with under subjection to him. Having entered the forests, these serpents killed all those who went with the said captains, and the calamity was so great that the Inca showed much concern at it. An old enchantress heard this, and she said that if she were allowed to go to the forests, she would put the serpents into so deep a sleep, that they would be able to do no harm. As soon as she had received permission, she went to the place where the people had been killed. Here she performed her incantations, and said certain words, upon which the snakes changed from fierce and wild, to the gentle and foolish creatures they now are. All this that the Indians say may indeed be a fiction or fable, but it is certainly true that these snakes, though so large, do no hurt to any one. The forests of the Andes were well peopled in those parts where the Incas had buildings and storehouses. The country is very fertile, yielding maize and yuccas, as well as the other roots which they raise, and there are many excellent fruits. Most of the Spanish citizens of Cusco have planted orange, lime, fig, vine, and other trees of Spain, besides large plantain groves, and very luscious and fragrant pines. In the very distant and dense parts of these forests they say that there is a people so savage, that they have neither houses nor clothes, but go about like animals, killing birds and beasts with arrows. They have neither chiefs nor captains, and they lodge in caves or in the hollows of trees, some in one part and some in another. It is said, also, but I have not seen them, that there are very large monkeys which go about in the trees. In the year 1549 I was at Charcas, and I went to see the cities in that region, for which purpose the President Gasca gave me letters of introduction to the corregidors, that I might learn all that was worthy of notice. Chapter 96. How the Indians carry herbs or roots in their mouths, and concerning the herb called coca, which they raise in many parts of this kingdom. In all parts of the Indies through which I have traveled I have observed that the natives take great delight in having herbs or roots in their mouths. Thus, in the district of the city of Antioquia, some of the people go about with a small leaf in their mouths, and in the province of Arma they chew another leaf. In the districts of Quinbaya and Onzerma they cut small twigs from a young green tree, which they rub against their teeth without ceasing. In most of the villages subject to the cities of Cali and Popayan they go about with small coca leaves in their mouths, to which they apply a mixture, which they carry in a calabash, made from a certain earth like lime. Throughout Peru the Indians carry this coca in their mouths, and from morning until they lie down to sleep, they never take it out. When I asked some of these Indians why they carried these leaves in their mouths, which they do not eat, but merely hold between their teeth, they replied that it prevents them from feeling hungry, and gives them great vigor and strength. I believe that it has some such effect, although, perhaps, it is a custom only suited for people like these Indians. They sow this coca in the forests of the Andes, from Guamanga to the town of Plata. The trees are small, and they cultivate them with great care, that they may yield the leaf called coca. They put the leaves in the sun, and afterwards pack them in long narrow bags, containing a little more than an arroba each. This coca was so highly valued in Peru in the years 1548, 1549, 1550, and 1551, that there was not a root nor anything gathered from a tree, except spice, which was in such estimation. In those years they valued the repartimientos of Cusco, La Paz, and Plata at $80,000, more or less, all arising from this coca. Coca was taken to the mines of Potosi for sale, and the planting of the trees and picking of the leaves was carried on to such an extent, that coca is not now worth so much, but it will never cease to be valuable. There are some persons in Spain who are rich from the produce of this coca, having traded with it, sold and resold it in the Indian markets. Chapter 97. Of the road from Cusco to the city of La Paz, and of the villages, until the Indians called canchas are passed. The distance from the city of Cusco to the city of La Paz is 80 leagues, a little more or less. It must be known that, before La Paz was founded, all the towns and villages now subject to that city were within the limits of the city of Cusco. Setting out from Cusco by the royal road of Calasuyu, it leads to the narrow pass of Mojina, leaving the buildings of Quispacanqui on the left hand. The road goes by this place, after leaving Cusco, and is paved with stones. In Mojina there is a large swamp, across which the road is carried on a paved causeway. There were great edifices in Mohina, which are now in ruins. When the governor Don Francisco Pizarro entered Cusco with the Spaniards, they found much gold and silver, and rich and precious clothing in these edifices. I have heard some Spaniards say that there was a block of stone in this place, in the shape of a man, with long ropes, and beads in the hand, besides other figures, some of which they adored as idols. Beyond Mohina is the ancient village of Urcos, which is about 6 leagues from Cusco. On this road there is a very large and strong wall, and the natives say that along the top of it a channel of water was conducted with great labor from a river, with the same skill and order as they make their other irrigating channels. In this great wall there was a broad doorway, at which there were porters who collected the tribute which the Indians were obliged to pay to the lords. There were other overseers of the same Incas at this place, to seize and punish those who had the audacity to take gold or silver out of the city of Cusco. In this place there were quarries whence they took stones for building edifices, which are well worth seeing. Urcos is built on a hill, where there were palaces for the lords. Thence to Quiquixana the distance is 3 leagues over a rugged country. Here the river of UK flows through the valley, over which there is a bridge made like others in this country. Near this place the Indians called Cavinas are settled, who, before they were subjugated by the Incas, wore a large ornament in their ears. They say that Manco Capac, the founder of the city of Cusco, secured the friendship of these Indians. They go about dressed in woolen clothes, with a black fillet twisted round their heads. In the mountains there are villages in which the houses are built of stone. In former times they held a temple in great veneration, called Osankata, near which they say that their ancestors saw an idol or devil in the same dress as their own. These Indians held for certain that the souls which departed from the bodies went to a great lake, where, in their vain belief, they held that they had their origin, and where they again entered into the bodies of those who were born. After they were subjugated by the Incas they became more civilized and intelligent, and adored the sun, without forgetting their former temple. Beyond this province is that of the Canches, who are intelligent and homely Indians, without malice, and always skillful in working, especially gold and silver. They also had large flocks of sheep. Their villages are like those of their neighbors, they wear the same clothes, with a black fillet round the head, the ends of which hang down as low as the chin. They say that, in ancient times, they waged great wars with Hakluyt Society, and with some of his predecessors, and that, when they submitted to their rule, the Incas valued them highly. Their arms were darts, slings, and weapons called elos, with which they captured their enemies. Their methods of interment were the same as those already described. Their tombs were built of stone, on the heights, and here they put the bodies of their chiefs, together with some of their wives and servants. They do not value the vanities and honors of the world, though it is true that some of the chiefs are haughty to the Indians, and treat them with asperity. At certain seasons of the year they celebrate their festivals, for which they have fixed days. In the buildings of the chiefs there were places where they had their dances, and where the chiefs ate and drank. They conversed with the devil, like all the other Indians. Throughout all the land of these Canches there is maize and wheat, and plenty of partridges and condors, and in their houses the Indians have many fowls. They also catch excellent fish in the rivers. Chapter 98. Of the provinces of Canas, and of Ayavire. After leaving the province of Canches, that of Canas is entered, which is the name of another tribe, and the names of the villages are Hatuncana, Chiquana, Hororo, Cacha, and others which I shall not enumerate. These Indians all wear clothes, both men and women, and they have large, round, high woolen caps on their heads. Before they were subjugated by the Incas, they had their villages in the mountain fastnesses, whence they came forth to make war. Afterwards they descended into the valley. Their customs with regard to burials are the same as those of the Canches. In the province of these Canas there was a temple which they called Ancocoa, where they performed sacrifices, in their blindness, and in the village of Cacha there were great edifices, built by order of Tupac Inca Yupanqui. On the other side of the river there is a small enclosure, within which they found some gold. This temple was built in memory of their god Hakluyt Cacha, whom they call the Creator. Within it there was a stone idol the height of a man, with a robe, and a crown or tiara on the head. Some said that this might be the statue of some apostle who arrived in this land. In the second part of this work I shall treat of what I believe, and of what I was able to collect respecting the report that fire came down from heaven, and converted many stones into cinders. Throughout this province of Canas the climate is cold, as well as in Canches, but the country is well supplied with provisions and flocks. To the west is the South Sea, and to the east the forests of the Andes. From the village of Chiquana, in this province of Canas, to Ayavire the distance is 15 leagues, within which limits there are some villages of the Canas, many plains, and great meadows well suited for flocks, if it were not so cold. Now the great quantity of herbage is only useful for guanacos and vicunas. In ancient times it was a grand thing to see this town of Ayavire, and the place is still worthy of note, especially the great tombs, which are so numerous that they occupy more space than the habitations of the living. The Indians positively assert that the natives of this town of Ayavire are of the same descent and lineage as those of Canas, and that the Inca Yupanqui waged wars and fought battles with them, in which they suffered so severely that they submitted to his service, to save themselves from entire destruction. But as some of the Incas were vindictive, after the Inca had killed a great number of the Indians of Copacopa and other villages in the forests of the Andes, whom he had got into his power by deceit, he did the same to the natives of Ayavire, in such sort that few or none were left alive. It is notorious that those who escaped wandered in the fields for a long time, calling on their dead, and mourning with groans and great sorrow over the destruction that had come upon their people. As Ayavire is a large district, through which a good river flows, the Inca Yupanqui ordered that a great palace should be built here, which was accordingly done, together with many buildings where the tribute was stored up. A temple of the sun was also built, as one of the most important things. The Inca then ordered that Indians, who are called Mitamis, should come here with their wives, for there were few natives left, and the Mitamis became lords of the soil, and heirs to the dead natives, and they were directed to form a large town near the Temple of the Sun and the principal edifices. The town went on increasing until the Spaniards arrived in this kingdom, but since that time, what with the civil wars and other calamities, it has greatly decreased, like all the others. I entered it at the time when it was held in encomienda by Juan de Pancurbo, a citizen of Cusco, and I learnt these particulars, which I have written down, from the best information within my reach. Near this town there is a ruined temple, where once they offered up sacrifices. And the multitude of tombs which appear all round this town is held to be a notable sight. Chapter 99. Of the great district which is inhabited by the Coyas, of the appearance of the land where their villages are built, and how Mitamis were stationed to supply them with provisions. The region which they call Callao appears to me to be the largest province in all Peru, and the most populous. The Coyas are first met with at Ayavire, and they extend as far as Caracoto. To the east of their province are the forests of the Andes, to the west are the peaks of the snowy mountains, which descend on the other side to the South Sea. Besides the lands which the natives occupy with their fields and houses, there are vast uninhabited tracts full of wild flocks. The land of the Coyas is level in most parts, and rivers of good water flow through it. These plains form beautiful and extensive meadows, the herbage of which is always plentiful, and at times very green, although in the spring it is parched up as in Spain. The winter begins, as I have already said, in October, and lasts until April. The days and nights are almost equal, and the cold in this district is greater than in any other part of Peru, excepting the snowy peaks, because the land is high, and comes up to the mountains. Certainly if this land of the Callao had a deep valley like those of Xoxo or Chuquiapu, which would yield maize, it would be one of the richest in all the Indies. When the wind is blowing it is hard work to travel over these plains of the Callao, but when there is no wind, and the sun is shining, it is very pleasant to see the beautiful and well-peopled meadows. But the climate is so cold that there is no maize, nor any kind of tree, and the land is too sterile to yield any of the fruits which grow in other parts. The houses in the villages are built of stone, and roofed with straw instead of tiles, and they are placed close together. This country of the Callao was once very populous, and was covered with large villages, round which the Indians had their fields, where they raised crops for food. Their principal food is potatoes, which are like earth nuts, as I have before declared in this history. They dry these potatoes in the sun, and keep them from one harvest to another. After they are dried they call these potatoes chunas, and they are highly esteemed and valued among them. They have no water in channels for irrigating the fields, as in many other parts of this kingdom, so that, if the natural supply of water required for the crops fails, they would suffer from famine and want if they had not this store of dried potatoes. Many Spaniards have enriched themselves and returned prosperous to Spain by merely taking these chunas to sell at the mines of Potosi. They have another kind of food called oca, which is also profitable, but not so much so as a seed which they also raise, called quinua, a small grain like rice. When the harvest is abundant, all the inhabitants of the Callao live contented and free from want, but when there is want of water they suffer great distress. But, in truth, the kings Incas who ruled over this empire were so wise, and such excellent governors, that they established laws and customs without which the majority of their people would have suffered great hardships, as they did before they came under the rule of the Incas. In the Callao, and in all the parts of Peru, where, owing to the cold climate, the land is not so fertile and abundant as in the warm valleys, they ordered that, as the great forests of the Andes bordered on these sterile tracts, a certain number of Indians with their wives should be taken from each village, and stationed to cultivate the land in the places where the chiefs directed them to settle. Here they sowed the things which would not grow in their own country, sending the fruits of their labors to their chiefs, and they were called Mitamis. At the present day they serve the principal encomienderos, and cultivate the precious coca. Thus, although no maize can be raised throughout the Kaloa, the chiefs and people did not fail to obtain it by this arrangement, for the Mitamese brought up loads of maize, coca, and fruits of all kinds, besides plenty of honey, which abounds in all parts of the forests, where it is formed in the hollows of trees in the way I have described when treating of Quinbaya. In the province of Charcas this honey is excellent. It is said that Francisco de Carbajal, master of the camp to Gonzalo Pizarro, always ate this honey, and though he drank it as if it had been water or wine, he always remained strong and healthy, as he was when I saw him judged in the valley of Zaquixaguana, although he was over 80 years of age according to his own account. Chapter 100. Of what is said concerning the origin of these Coyas, of their appearance, and how they buried their dead. Many of these Indians say that they have heard from their fathers that, in times past, there was a great deluge, in the manner described by me in the 3rd chapter of the 2nd part. They also declare that the origin of their ancestors was very ancient, and they relate so many sayings and fictions that I shall not stop to write them down, for some say that their ancestors came out of a fountain, others from a rock, and others out of a lake, so that no sense can be learnt from them concerning their origin. But they all agree that their ancestors lived in a wild state before they were subjugated by the Incas, that they had strongholds in the mountains whence they came out to fight, and that they had many vicious customs. Afterwards they learnt from the Incas all that had been made known to the other vassals, and they built their villages in the same way as they have them now. Both men and women are clothed in woolen dresses. They say that, before marriage, the women may go loosely, but that they are punished with death if they are guilty of infidelity after they have been delivered to husbands. These people wear woolen caps called chucos on their heads. Their heads are very long, and flattened behind, because they are pressed and forced into what shape they choose during childhood. The women wear hoods on their heads, almost of the same shape as those worn by friars. Before the Incas conquered the country, many of the Indians declare that there were 2 great lords in the Kaloa, the one called Sapana and the other Kari, who conquered many Pucaras, which are their fortresses. They add that one of these chiefs entered the large island in the lake of Titicaca, and found there a white people who had beards, that they fought with them in such a manner that all were killed, and that they also fought great battles with the Kanas and Canchas. After they had performed notable deeds, these tyrants, or lords, who had risen up in the Callao, turned their arms against each other, seeking also for the friendship of the Inca Huruc Cacha, who then reigned in Cusco. The Inca made a treaty of peace with Cari at Chucuito, and intrigued so skillfully that he became lord of a great part of the Callao without fighting. The principal chiefs of this country go about with a large retinue, and, when they travel, they are carried in litters, and treated with great respect by all the Indians. They had their temples and wakas in secret places, where they adored their gods, and those who were selected for that duty conversed with the devil. The things which, to my mind, are most worthy of notice in the Callao, are the tombs of the dead. When I traveled over this country I stopped to write down all that deserved mention concerning the Indians, and I was truly astonished to see how little they cared for having large and handsome houses for the living, while they bestowed so much care on the tombs where the dead were interred, as if all happiness did not consist in something else. Thus, in the plains and meadows near their villages, the tombs were built in the form of small towers, some of stones only, and others of stones mixed with earth, some broad and others narrow, according to the rank and wealth of those who built them. Some of them were roofed with straw, and others with large slabs. I observed that the doors of these towers were towards the east. When the natives of the Callao died they were mourned for during many days, the women holding staves in their hands, and putting ashes on their bodies. The relations of the deceased each contributed something, as well sheep, lambs, and maize, as other things, and, before they buried the corpse, they killed sheep, put the cooked meat into the rooms of their houses, and made much drink from the maize. The deceased is honored according to the quantity of this beverage that is made. When the drink is ready, and the sheep and lambs killed, they carry the corpse to the place where the tomb is prepared, accompanied, if the deceased was a chief, by the people of the village. Then they burnt 10, 20, or more sheep, according to the rank of the dead man, and killed the women, boys and servants who were to accompany him, according to their vain belief. All these are buried in the same tomb with the body, into which they also put some people alive. Having interred the deceased in this manner, they all return to the house whence they had taken the body, and there eat the food and drink the chicha, coming out from time to dance mournful dances in the appointed places near the house. This goes on for some days, at the end of which the poorest men and women are assembled, and given what remains of the food and chicha. If the deceased was a great chief, they did not bury him immediately, but, before doing so, they practiced superstitious vanities for some days, which I shall not describe. When these are finished, the women and servant girls who have not been killed come out into the village in their mantles and hoods, some carrying the arms of the chief, others his ornamental headdress, and others his clothes and other things. They walk along uttering sad and sorrowful words, while an Indian goes before them mourning and playing on a drum. Thus they traverse the greater part of the village, declaring, in their songs, the deeds of the dead chief, and other things concerning him. I remember that when I was going to Charcas in company with Diego de Uzeda, who now lives in the city of La Paz, we saw certain women walking in this way through the village of Nicasio, and we learnt from the people of the village that they were saying what I have described in this chapter. One of the Indians added that when these women had finished their lamentations, they would be made drunk, and some of them would be killed to accompany the dead man. In many other villages I have seen them mourn for the dead during many days, and put ropes of sedge round their heads as a sign of grief. Chapter 101. How these Indians perform their annual ceremonies, and of the temples they had in ancient times. In the last chapter I have declared how these people made great ado when they put their dead into the tombs. After the interment the women and servants shaved their heads, put on their commonest clothing, and took no care of their persons. Besides this, in order to show their grief, they twisted ropes of sedge round their heads, and uttered continual lamentations during a whole year if the deceased was a chief, and had no light in the house for several days. These people, by the permission of God, were, like all the others, deceived by the devil with the false and delusive apparitions of some people who were dead, dressed and adorned in the way their bodies had been put into the tombs. In order to show more care for the dead they held annual festivals, when they brought animals and killed them near the tombs, also emptying many vases of liquor over the tombs, which completed this vain and foolish ceremony. As this nation of the Kalau was so numerous, they had, in former times, great temples and superstitious rites, venerating those whom they set apart as priests, and who conversed with the devil. They held their festivals at the season when they got in their potatoes, which is their principal food, and then they killed animals as sacrifices. At the present time we do not know that they have any public temple, but, by the will of our God and Lord, many Catholic churches have been founded, where our priests preach the Holy Gospel, and teach the faith to all the Indians who desire to receive the water of baptism. I verily believe that if there had been no civil wars, and if we had sincerely and earnestly endeavored to convert these people, many would have been saved, who have now been damned. At present there are priests and friars in many parts of the Kalau, appointed by those who hold encomiendas over the Indians, and I pray to God that He will carry this work forward without weighing our sins. The natives of the Kalau say the same as all the other people of the Sierra, that the Creator of the world was called Hurukkacha, and they know that His principal abode is in heaven, but, deceived by the devil, they adored various gods, like all the other Gentiles. They have certain romances or songs in which they preserve the memory of their deeds, and prevent their being forgotten, although they have no letters. Among the people of the Kalau there are men of great intelligence, who reply to what is asked from them, and they take account of time, and know some of the movements both of the sun and the moon. They count their years from 10 months to 10 months, and I learnt from them that they called the year Mari, the moon or month Ailspakex, and the day Oro. When they submitted to the Incas they made great temples by their order, both on the island of Titicaca and at Hachancala, as well as in other parts. Chapter 102. Of the ancient ruins at Pucara, of the former greatness of Hachancala, of the village called Azongaro, and of other things which are here related. Now that I have related certain things that I was able to collect respecting the Kalau as briefly as possible, I propose to continue my writing by giving an account of the villages along the Royal Road, as far as the city of La Paz, which is built in the valley of Chuquiapu, on the confines of the great province of the Kalau. Coming from Ayavire along the Royal Road, the traveler reaches Pucara, which means a strong place, 4 leagues from Ayavire. I remained a whole day at Pucara looking at everything. It is reported by the Indians that there was formerly a large population in this place, but at present there is scarcely an inhabitant. The neighboring Indians say that Tupac Yinka Yupanqui besieged the place during many days, for, before they could be conquered, the natives showed themselves to be so valorous, that they killed many people. When they were finally conquered, the Inca ordered great stone pillars to be set up in memory of the victory. Whether this be really so or not I cannot say, but the Indians declare it. I saw the ruins of great edifices in Pucara, and many pillars of stone carved in the form of men, besides other things worthy of note. The distance from Pucara to Hachancala is 15 leagues, and on the road there are some villages, such as Nicasio, Juliaca, and others. In former times Hachancala was the principal place in the Kalau, and the natives affirmed that before the Incas conquered the country, the chief Sapana and some of his descendants ruled here, who were so powerful that they gained many spoils from the neighboring people whom they defeated in battle. Afterwards the Incas adorned the place with new edifices and many storehouses, where, by their order, the tribute was received from the surrounding districts. There was also a temple of the sun, with many mamakunas and priests for its service, and a great quantity of mitamis and soldiers to watch the frontier, and to prevent any tyrant from rising against him whom they held as sovereign lord. Thus it may be affirmed that Hachin Kala was a grand place, as its name implies, for Hachin means great in their language. In these times all is in ruins, and most of the inhabitants have been killed in the wars. From Ayavire another road goes to Omasuyu, which leads round the other side of the great lake of which I shall treat presently, and nearer to the forests of the Andes. It passes by the large villages of Asalo, Azongaro, and others of less importance, and the country is very rich both in flocks and provisions. When the Incas conquered this country, the people of these villages had large flocks of sheep. In the same district, in the forests of the Andes, is the famous and very rich river of Caravalla, whence, in former years, they took more than 1,700,00 pesos of gold of such fineness that it exceeded the standard, and gold is still found in the river, but it is only obtained with great labor, and by the death of the Indians who work in it, for the climate is unhealthy, though the wealth of the river is great. Chapter 103. Of the great lake which is within the province of the Callao, of its depth, and of the temple of Titicaca. This land of the Callao is very extensive, as I have said in former chapters, and, besides the inhabited parts, there are many deserts, snowy mountains, and grassy plains which yield sustenance to the wild flocks which wander in all directions. In the center of the province there is the largest and broadest lake that has been found in the Indies, near which are most of the villages of the Callao. The people raise their crops on large islands in the lake, where they also keep their valuables, as being safer than in the villages along the roads. I remember that I have already said that it is so cold in this province, that not only are there no fruit trees, but they cannot raise maize. In the beds of reeds in this lake there are many kinds of birds, such as large ducks, and they kill 2 or 3 kinds of fish in the lake, which are very good, though they are held to be unwholesome. This lake is so large that it has a circumference of 80 leagues, and so deep that the captain Juan Ladriaro told me that in some parts, when he was sailing with his brigantines, he found the depth to be 70 or 80 brazes, in some places more, in others less. In this respect, and in regard to the waves that are formed when the wind rises, it appears like some gulf of the sea. If it is desired that I should say how so much water was collected into this lake, I am unable to do so, for, though many rivers and streams fall into it, I do not think that they would suffice to make it what it is, especially as a river flows out of it into another smaller lake called Augas. It may be that, after the deluge, this lake remained with the water we now see in it, for if it communicated with the sea the water would be salt and not fresh, besides it is at a distance of 60 leagues from the sea. All this water flows out in a deep river which they call the Desaguadero, and falls into the lake which, as I have already said, is called Augas. Another thing worthy of attention is, that we see how the water of one lake enters the other, that is, the water of the lake of the Callao flows into the Augas, but not how it flows out of the lake of Augas, although it has been examined on all sides. On this subject I have heard both Spaniards and Indians say that, in some of the valleys near the South Sea, they had seen streams of water, which flow under the earth towards the said sea, and they believe that this may be the water of the lake, draining out and opening for itself a road through the bowels of the earth, until it reaches the place to which all waters go, which is the sea. The great lake of the Callao is called Titicaca, from the temple which was built on an island in it. The natives held a very vain and foolish belief, which was, that in the time of their ancestors there was no light for many days, and that, when all was wrapped in darkness and obscurity, the resplendent sun came up out of this island of Titicaca, for which reason it was considered sacred, and the Incas erected a temple on it in honor of the sun, which was much revered and venerated among them, and which contained many virgins and priests, and great store of treasure, of which the Spaniards, at different times, have collected a great deal, but most of it is still missing. If, in truth, the Indians ever really were in want of light, as they say, it must have been owing to some eclipse of the sun, and, as they are such sorcerers, they invented this fable, in which they were assisted by the illusions of the devil, God permitting it for their sins. Chapter 104. In which the narrative continues, and the villages are described as far as Tiahuanaco. Returning to the road where I left it, which was at Hatoncala, I have to say that it passes thence by Paucarcala, and other villages of this nation of the Collas, to Chucuito, which is one of the principal and most complete towns in any part of this great kingdom, and is the chief place of the Indians owned by His Majesty in this province. It is certain, too, that the Incas in former times held Chucuito to be an important place, and, according to the accounts of the Indians, it is the most ancient place of any that I have yet described. Caraya Paso was the chief of this place, and, for an Indian, was a very intelligent man. There are large buildings here, and, before the chiefs were subjugated by the Incas, they were very powerful, among whom the Indians mentioned two as the principal, named Cary and Humala. Chucuito is now, as I have said, the principal village of the Indians of His Majesty, whose other villages are Juli, Chillon, Acos, Palmita, and Zepeda, in which there are chiefs who command the Indians. When I passed through these parts, the corregidor was Simon Pinto, and the governor was an Indian named Gaspar, an intelligent and clever man. The natives are rich in flocks, and they have plenty of provisions. In other parts they have minimes stationed to raise their maize and coca. There are fine churches in these villages founded by the Reverend Father Friar Thomas de San Martin, principal of the Dominicans. The young men, and others who most desire it, assemble to hear the evangelical doctrine preached by the friars and clergymen. Most of the chiefs have turned Christians. Near Zepeda flows the Desaguadero, where, till the days of the Incas, there used to be toll takers who received tribute from those who passed over the bridge, which is made of bundles of stalks, in such sort that men and horses can cross over it. In one of these villages, called Juli, the master of the camp, Francisco de Carbajal, hung the captain Hernando Bachacao. This is one of the examples which show us that the civil wars and troubles in Peru were the scourges of God, for they killed each other with great cruelty, as I shall relate in the proper place. Beyond these villages is Huaqui, where there were buildings of the Incas, one of which is now a church, where the children may hear the Christian doctrine at the proper hours. Chapter 105. Of the village of Tiahuanaco, and of the great and ancient edifices which are to be seen there. Tiahuanaco is not a very large village, but it is celebrated for the great edifices near it, which are certainly things worth seeing. Near the buildings there is a hill made by the hands of men, on great foundations of stone. Beyond this hill there are two stone idols, of the human shape and figure, the features very skillfully carved, so that they appear to have been done by the hand of some great master. They are so large that they seem like small giants, and it is clear that they have on a sort of clothing different from those now worn by the natives of these parts. They seem to have some ornament on their heads. Near these stone statues there is another building. Their antiquity and the want of letters are the causes why it is not known who built such vast foundations, and how much time has since elapsed, for at present there is only a wall very well built, and which must have been standing for many ages. Some of the stones are much worn. At this part there are stones of such enormous size that it causes wonder to think of them, and to reflect how human force can have sufficed to move them to the place where we see them, being so large. Many of these stones are carved in different ways, some of them having the shape of the human body, which must have been their idols. Near the wall there are many holes and hollow places in the ground. In another, more to the westward, there are other ancient remains, among them many doorways, with their jambs, lintels, and thresholds, all of one stone. But what I noted most particularly, when I wandered about over these ruins writing down what I saw, was that from these great doorways there came out other still larger stones, upon which the doorways were formed, some of them 30 feet broad, 15 or more long, and 6 in thickness. The whole of this, with the doorway and its jambs and lintel, was all one single stone. The work is one of grandeur and magnificence, when well considered. For myself I fail to understand with what instruments or tools it can have been done, for it is very certain that before these great stones could be brought to perfection and left as we see them, the tools must have been much better than those now used by the Indians. It is to be noted, from what now appears of these edifices, that they were not completed, for there is nothing but these portals, and other stones of strange bigness which I saw, some of them shaped and dressed ready to be placed on the edifice, which was a little on one side. Here there was a great idol of stone, which must have been placed there to be worshipped. It is rumored that some gold was found near this idol, and all round there are more stones, large and small, all dressed and fitted like those already described. There are other things to be said concerning Tiahuanaco, which I pass over, concluding with a statement of my belief that this ruin is the most ancient in all Peru. It is asserted that these edifices were commenced before the time of the Incas, and I have heard some Indians affirm that the Incas built their grand edifices at Cusco on the plan which they had observed at the wall near these ruins. They even say that the first Incas thought of establishing their court at Tiahuanaco. Another remarkable thing is, that in all this district there are no quarries whence the numerous stones can have been brought, the carrying of which must have required many people. I asked the natives, in presence of Juan de Varagas, who holds them in encomienda, whether these edifices were built in the time of the Incas, and they laughed at the question, affirming that they were made before the Incas ever reigned, but that they could not say who made them. They added that they had heard from their fathers that all we saw was done in one night. From this, and from the fact that they also speak of bearded men on the island of Titicaca, and of others who built the edifice of Vinic, it may, perhaps, be inferred that, before the Incas reigned, there was an intelligent race who came from some unknown part, and who did these things. Being few, and the natives many, they may all have been killed in the wars. Seeing that all these things are hidden from us, We may well say, blessed be the invention of letters, by virtue of which the memory of events endures for many ages, and their fame flies through the universe. We are not ignorant of what we desire to know when we hold letters in our hands. But in this new world of the Indies, as they knew nothing of letters, we are in a state of blindness concerning many things. Apart from these ruins there are the buildings of the Incas, and the house where Manco Inca, the son of Huayna Capac, was born. Close by are the tombs of the native chiefs of this place, as high as towers, broad and square, with doors towards the rising sun.